Our Father, who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in this council chamber for the betterment of our fellow citizens, lead us that we may do all things well. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeBerke?
Present.
Mr. Ray Culverson?
Here.
Mr. Schuldmeyer?
Present.
Mr. Bob Culverson?
Here.
Mrs. Beddinghouse? Here. Mrs. Miller?
Here.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Here.
Let the record show that all 7 members are present. Members of council, what is your pleasure of the reading of the last minutes?
Mr. President,
Ms. Beddinghouse?
make a motion to dispense with the reading of the last minutes. I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Beddinghouse, second by Ms. Hausfeld to dispense with the reading of the last minutes. Are there any remarks? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. Members of council, are there any errors or corrections to the minutes submitted? Not, the minutes will stand as submitted. Move to reports of city officials. Mayor, Mr. Stuchel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to start with a moment of silence as we remember 2 special individuals on the anniversary of their deaths. Bill Temple, who was a lieutenant for the St. Bernard Police Department, who died September 24th, 2017, and Curtis Walden, law director and former president of council, who died September 24th, 2015. Again, if we could please have a moment of silence for them. Thank you. As expected, Valerie will not be here tonight as she is with her daughters. As you've probably heard, Governor DeWine has made the decision to put the responsibility on the local municipalities as to whether trick or treat happens or not. I do not have any desire to take anything away from our kids, and I have every intention to allow for this to happen with some minor modifications. To allow for those who are participating to be more visible and to properly distance themselves, trick or treat will be held on Saturday, October 31st from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. Further details on best practices will be announced for this event. I'd also like to be put on the agenda for the committee of the whole meeting to discuss the Franklin Avenue property, body cams and in-car video for the police department, and allow for a brief presentation on the potential addition of a K-9 unit for the police department. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Auditor, Ms. Brickway.
Hold on, we got a little tangle here. Thank you, Mr. President. The Auditor's Office prepared Resolution 9/2020 for tonight's meeting. This resolution approves the amounts and tax rates determined by the Budget Commission. This is the second step in the 2021 projected budget required by the county. The Auditor's Office prepared Ordinance 21/2020, which creates a new position of Finance Assistant and fixes the compensation of the position. This new position will take the place of the tax clerk and the deputy auditor. This is the start of combining the 2 departments into a finance department. It will save the village over $39,000 a year. The Auditor's Office also prepared Ordinance 22/2020. This ordinance creates 2 new line items: General Fund 2B3 Finance Assistant and Fund 20-01 CRF Corona-19 Care. It also decreases multiple line items that total to the amount of $70,321.70. It has additional appropriations to 2B3 Finance Assistant for $18,000, 2I9 Professional Services for $50,000, 6A13 Police Equipment Outlay for $10,000, 58-7R Ross Park for $52,000, and 20-01 CRF Corona-19 Care for $201,687.80. The legal professional service increase is needed to cover additional legal services in regard to the billboard on West Ross Avenue. The police equipment outlay is appropriating revenue the village received in July to help cover switching the police record management system. The Corona-19 is appropriating money the village received from Hamilton County in regards to the Corona-19 virus. Thank you, Mr. President. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Mayor, there's no report from the Director of Law. Okay, thank you. Treasurer, Mr. Ungley.
I have no report this evening, thank you.
Thank you. Safety and Service Director, Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, everyone. The blower shutdown test for the Bank Avenue monitoring is continuing through November. This weekly monitoring will continue as we had a spike in readings in 2 monitors. One of those 2 monitors have receded to normal level, and the other is at 8%, needing to be at 5% or lower. We have contacted EPA, and they suggest we continue with the shutdown because the spikes have subsided. SCS Engineering has made me aware of this and has also alerted me that this will incur more expenses. I will keep you posted. The worst case scenario is $11,000 additional expense. I have 2 estimates on the stairs at Ross Avenue Park. One is for $65,000 plus $14,000 for the rails. The second one would be 7-foot stairs, single center rail at $68,277. I will contact the first bidder for identical labor and materials, so it'll be kind of different. And then to my community. When it's our time, we enter into this world and onto our very own path. It is our life's walkway. We do have free will to allow us to venture off our avenue. However, life is a challenge, and you will find yourself feeling much better on the fairway, free of obstacles. Seek what you know to be true in your heart, for their peace will enlighten your ways. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Tax Commissioner / Administrator, Ms. Helms.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a couple things tonight, so bear with me, everybody. The receipts for August 2020, tax collections for August were $620,007.22. Tax refunds for August were $9,496.25. The village is down 23.1% in revenue from August of 2019. Year-to-date tax collection is up 8.46%. $62,408 in delinquent taxes with capital recovery. $96,127 in delinquent tax is being pursued for judgment and garnishment collection work. 2020 third quarter estimate statements were mailed this week. A letter was enclosed with everyone's bill to try to make sense of this crazy year. Due to the federal government moving the tax due date to 7/15, it was impossible for the tax office to send the second quarter statement out. Third quarter statements may look higher than usual and may include your first and second quarter amounts. Do not panic and stay calm. I will work with you. Call me if you have any questions or need assistance. Taxpayers who owed more than $200 in tax for the 2019 tax year received a quarterly statement for 2020. Quarterly payments are required by law to be paid throughout the tax year. If you wait till April 15th to pay, you could be subject to hefty penalties pursuant to state law. Again, call me if you have any questions regarding this. Due to the passage of Issue 7 earlier this year, Cincinnati's tax rate decreases to 1.8% beginning October 2nd, 2020. St. Bernard's tax rate will remain at 2.1%. Residents who pay Cincinnati withholding tax will still get credit for St. Bernard. It will just be at 1.8%. Those people will now owe St. Bernard the 0.3% difference when they file their village tax return. Work from home emergency provisions remain in effect for 30 days after the Ohio governor ends the state of emergency. Withholding is required as if remote employees were working in their principal place of business. There will be no refunds from the village. I know that taxes can be confusing and they are not fun. And this year has been stressful and trying for everyone, including me. Your tax dollars are vital to operate the village and make your community safe and clean. This is your community and it's my job to collect the money needed to provide these services to you. My door is always open and please feel free to call me before you get upset. St. Bernard's residents are what make this community great. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Now move to reports of standing committees. Finance, Mr. Taberky.
Thank you, Mr. President. The village received $24,769.16 from the garbage fee program for August. This brings the total for the first 8 months of the year to $197,349.41. Includes my report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Safety, Mr. Ray Culbertson.
Thanks, Mr. President. I've got the fire department report for August.
There were a total of 54 fire incidents, which included 7 structural fires, 12 auto accidents, 3 hazmat incidents, and 16 times they assisted EMS. There's mutual aid was given on the fire side 3 times to Norwood, 6 times to Elmwood Place, and once to Cincinnati. We received mutual aid from Elmwood Place 3 times, Little Miami 3 times, Lockland 3 times, Cincinnati once, Springfield Township once, Wyoming twice, and Reading once. EMS, there were a total of 112 EMS incidents in the month of August, 2 non-breathers, 12 unconscious, 12 auto accidents, and 3 overdoses. On the EMS side, mutual aid was given to Elmwood Place 28 times, Norwood twice, and Cincinnati once. We received mutual aid from Norwood once, Cincinnati once, and Lockland once. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Service, Mr. Schultmeyer.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Public improvements, Mr. Bob Culbertson.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Laws, contracts, and claims, Ms. Bettinghouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Laws, Contracts, and Claims Committee will be meeting this Wednesday, 9:30, September 30th at 6 p.m. down in the lower level of Municipal Hall. This is to hopefully finalize the anti-discrimination ordinance, and hopefully we'll get it to everybody for council for committee of whole discussion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Marketing, Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our community has some great fall events happening, and really it is just something to look forward to amidst the COVID crisis. PAC 354 Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts are recruiting scouts in kindergarten and up to join our crew. You can contact me for more details. My cell phone number is 513-289-2920. St. Bernard Elementary will be hosting a trunk or treat on Saturday, October 17th at Vine Street Park from 4 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. This event is hosted by the Titan Fan Club. This event will require masks and social distancing. Lastly, just another reminder, we have spaces for the St. Bernard Halloween Campout. Contact Recreation at 513-383-0408 to claim your spot. This concludes my report.
Thank you. Business and Industry, Ms. Houseville.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight I have the Building and Zoning Department report for 2020 for August. Building and activities, 9 residential permits, 3 commercial permits. Total fees for residential permits was $1,280.72. Total fees for commercial permits were $949.09. Amount paid back to the Treasurer, State of Ohio for residential was $12.84. And the amount paid back to the Treasurer, State of Ohio for commercial was $28.47. That concludes my report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Committee of the Whole, Ms. Kathman.
The Committee of the Whole has been emailed to the administration and members of council.
Thank you. Clerk, are there any communications this evening?
No, Mr. President.
Thank you. Could you please give the first reading of Resolution Number 9, 2020?
Resolution 9, 2020. Resolution accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of Resolution Number 9, 2020. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of resolution number 9, 2020.
Second, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Taberkey to suspend with the second and third reading of Resolution Number 9, 2020. Are there any remarks? If not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. Taberkey?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson?
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer? Mr. Bob Culberson?
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mrs. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Houseveld?
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to adopt resolution number 9, 2020.
Second, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Taberkey to adopt Resolution Number 9, 2020. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Taberkey?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson?
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer? Mr. Bob Culberson?
Aye.
Mrs.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Houseveld?
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Resolution number 9, 2020 is adopted as read. Could you please give the first reading of ordinance number 17, 2020?
Ordinance number 17, 2020, an ordinance approving the vacation of a portion of Clay Street pursuant to Revised Code 723.05 and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 17, 2020. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 17, 2020.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Bob Culbertson to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 17, 2020. Are there any remarks? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance number 17? If not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer. Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to adopt ordinance number 17, 2020.
I'll second it.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Ray Culbertson to adopt ordinance number 17, 2020. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer. Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 17, 2020 is adopted as read. Clerk, will you please give the first reading of ordinance number 18, 2020?
Ordinance number 18, 2020. An ordinance authorizing the Village of St. Bernard to consolidate parcels 582-0005-0093, 582-005-0066, 582-005-0079, 582-0005-0067, 582-005-0068, and a vacated portion of Clay Street and declaring an emergency.
Very well done. Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 18, 2020. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 18, 2020.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Bob Culbertson to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 18, 2020. Are there any remarks? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 18? Not, clerk, will you call the roll on suspension?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer. Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
I make a motion to adopt ordinance number 18, 2020.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Bob Culbertson to adopt ordinance number 18, 2020. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer. Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 18, 2020 is adopted as read. Clerk, will you please give the first reading of ordinance number 19, 2020?
Ordinance number 19, 2020, an ordinance approving the dedication of a portion of Ross Avenue and Vine Street pursuant to Revised Code 723.03 and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 19, 2020. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 19, 2020.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Bob Culbertson to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 19, 2020. Are there any remarks? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 19? If not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer. Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to adopt ordinance number 19, 2020.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Bob Culbertson to adopt ordinance number 19, 2020. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer. Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 19, 2020 is adopted as read. Clerk, would you please give the first reading of ordinance number 20, 2020?
Ordinance number 20, 2020, an ordinance authorizing the Village of St. Bernard to convey the property located at the intersection of Ross and Vine Street, see Exhibit A, to the St. Bernard Community Improvement Corporation pursuant to an Article 3, Section 1 of the Agreement and Plan between the Village of St. Bernard, Ohio, and the St. Bernard Community Improvement Corporation, and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 20, 2020. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
I make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 20, 2020.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Bob Culberson, to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance 20, 2020. Are there any remarks? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 20? Please state your name and address for the record.
Nicole Klungel, 551 Church Street. I know that this ordinance is just going to go ahead and pass. I don't have any illusions about that, but I'd like to point out that there are things that council could be doing. I've been sitting in on the Laws, Contracts, and Claims Committee meetings recently, and one of the things that the committee discussed was future-proofing the anti-discrimination ordinance, because the Laws, Contracts, and Claims Committee will have a role in enforcing it later, and not all of the committee members that are sitting on the committee today will necessarily be sitting on it 20 years from now. So with that in mind, there are things you could do as well to future-proof the CIC, because as you know, there are elected officials on the CIC, and those people will not necessarily always be guaranteed to be there. Some of the things that you can do when transferring a property to CIC, and you can actually work with CIC on this now if you wanted to. For instance, you could prohibit a certain kind of development if there's one that you all know you don't want. You could specify a specific type of development you do want. You could make the property ineligible for tax abatements for a certain number of years. You could designate that the construction should have some kind of environmental certification. One that's very common is LEEDs. And you could also require community input on the development. I know that CIC plans to include that already, but you could specify it as a condition for the transfer. So I just wanted to bring those up because if this occurs in the future, it might be something you want to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to address council? If not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. DeBerke.
No.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer. Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller. Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
6 ayes, 1 nay. Motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption of ordinance 20, 2020?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
I make a motion to adopt ordinance number 20, 2020.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Bob Culberson to adopt ordinance number 20, 2020. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeBerke.
No.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer. Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
6 ayes, 1 nay. Motion carries. Ordinance number 20, 2020 is adopted as read. Clerk, will you please give the first reading of ordinance number 21, 2020?
Ordinance number 21, 2020, creating the position of finance assistant and fixing the rate of compensation for this position starting August 1, 2020, and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 21, 2020. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
I make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 21, 2020.
Go ahead. A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Mr. Schultmeyer to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 21, 2020. Are there any remarks?
Mr. President,
Mr. Ray Culberson.
I've got some more questions for Valerie on this that I've emailed in that I would like to talk to her about, so I would like to see this go regular course.
Is there anyone else have any remarks?
Mr. President,
Mr. Bob Culbertson.
just some general questions or comments I've gotten from residents or just was thinking myself on this position. So technically, we are eliminating the tax deputy auditor position and the auditor. Those two positions are being eliminated, and this position's being created. Is that what's happening?
Yes. Yes.
So with that being said, the question was, since we were creating a new position, do we have to put it out, and post that position, since it is a new position and it's not a technical, job advancement or promotion?
Basically, it is a promotion. We just named it a different title, and it's an appointed position as of now, so no, you do not. And is that all that you have?
Mr.
Ray, can
President.
I ask what your questions are since we discussed this?
About the appointed spot, or appointed position. I don't see anywhere in here, I mean, I guess how are we certain that this is gonna stay an appointed position for right now? Should there be any language in this that it's an appointed position, or are we binding ourselves by?
Well, none of your other ordinances say appointed positions.
Okay, well, and that's why I'm asking, and I haven't heard.
Well,
I didn't
and
get a
if you,
direct answer
if
from
you
Valerie.
remember from 2 weeks ago, we said we're going to go ahead and vote on this one and then work on getting a contract to all of you. And that's what was agreed on, and that's what we agreed to do.
Okay, and then the only other thing I've got, again, and I know you guys discussed this, or Peggy discussed it, and I believe the mayor did, the 30+% increase with this. I've done some research too, and in the state of Ohio, a public finance assistant officer, the average salary is $47,862. It ranges anywhere from $41,000 up to $52,500 based on education, certification, and years on the job. So I guess I'm gonna go back to who do we compare this with, and how did we come up with those amounts?
Mr. President, because when you're
Quickly.
looking at just the finance assistant, the finance assistants that you see on there are for one department. This person's doing 2 different department jobs. We're doing something different that other municipalities haven't done. We're combining 2 jobs into one to save the money. So that's why when you're looking at those, prime example, if you look at auditor, it's gonna look a lot less because those auditors are part-time and don't do what our auditor does. In St. Bernard, we have, our job descriptions, our job responsibilities are a lot different than other municipalities. Like in no other municipality does an auditor take care of the entire village's human resources, just as an example. But I did, and I asked around, and those were either they were working for just one department or the other. They were doing just accounts payables or accounts receivables and not even doing the tax. So basically, when you're seeing finance assistant, that would basically be your deputy a deputy auditor position, and not the tax clerk.
Mr. President,
Mr. Studo.
and that was, and correct me if I'm wrong, the deputy auditor's position, which I eliminated before, basically this individual is doing that person's job and being the deputy auditor, and that previous position was at that salary rate. Deputy tax.
What
I'm
you're
sorry.
saying is, yeah, the rates that you just gave were what we were paying our deputy auditor, which would be correct. But now we're adding on all the responsibilities of also working in the tax department. So the finance assistants, as I said before, is basically accounts payables and accounts receivables, which is what he was doing. But we're adding in another whole job description and responsibility.
Go ahead.
And I do want to add one thing. I'm here all the time working. If people have questions, you can feel, and Ray, I just talked to you last night.
Right.
You can call or talk to me instead of waiting to put people, to ask them here. You're more than welcome to email me or call me with any questions. You know, that was 2 weeks ago, and maybe you just came up with them today and right now. But I'm just saying in the future, you're more than welcome to ask me questions outside of this meeting.
Mr. President.
Mr. Bob Culbertson.
Something that just triggered my memory, Peggy, was you said previously this was a kind of a trial run, and if you guys needed help, you guys were going to have a part-time position back there. So there is no plan to have a part-time secretary or position back there?
Mr. President, what I said, as of now, absolutely not. Now, if we got into, say, March or April and we were falling behind in tax returns, we might consider it, but we don't foresee that happening. But I don't want to tie hands to something we have not done yet. It would still save you tons of money if you just hired a temp for 1 month. We've discussed it. As of now, there's no plans for that at all.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
the one thing that I noticed when I was rereading this job description, is there any educational requirements for this position? I don't see it in here.
Well, since we don't have any for any of the positions, no, but he does have a bachelor's degree in business administration.
Okay.
President.
Mr. Bob Culberson.
And Peggy, I agree, I'm not looking at the individual that you guys have for the position. I do agree with Cindy. I think with any of our ordinances moving forward, and I know I brought it up early in the year about moving out of the, the tax audit and treasurer position and having like I'll say public, speaking, a chief financial officer or financial officer. I would like to see some background for an educational piece of this or experience piece or a combination of both, just to, back to what you were saying last week, prevent the buddy system of, okay, hey, I got a guy that can add 2 + 2, let's throw him back there and give him a salary or her a salary. So that would be my only concern. And, like I said in the last meeting, it's our opportunity to get it right. I know we don't always do things, correct, but, if the position that we're trying to create here is to create a long-term feasible position for a potential employee to come in here and not feel like they're always under the gun every 2 or 4 years. I would like to see it, permanent or contract with an educational piece or experience piece.
Mr. President, I gave all of you a 2-page, very detailed job description.
Mr. President.
Bettinghouse.
Yeah, I totally agree with the job description. I'm on with Bob. I really want to see us starting to put in some kind of an education requirement. So I'm not sure if we do pass this ordinance, do we have an opportunity then to revise the job description, or can we revise that as we do a contract? I don't want to put a cart before a horse.
Mr. President.
But I want to make sure we go in the right direction, because I really do want to see an educational requirement within the job description.
Mr. President, you can change the job descriptions at any point. The job description is not tied to this ordinance. But I will also add, both people I hired had business administration degrees. Okay, so they are both been beyond qualified, and sometimes you have to trust the people hiring them. But at the same point, the one thing that we will have some issues with, it's all great to have the degree, totally agree, but it's the software we're using. You're not going to find a lot. They're not teaching bucks and chips and mitts in college. So I think you need to really take that into consideration, since those are the 2 main pieces of software that we do 90% of our work in. So even if they had a master's degree, that doesn't mean they're not going to know the software. So I do agree we can work on the job description, but I do think we have to put a lot of little more clout in that also, besides just having a degree, that they're knowledgeable in our software systems.
Are there any other remarks?
Mr. President, can I speak?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Hunt.
I'm the tax administrator, and I've been doing this job for about 20 years. My background is in law enforcement. 20 years ago, I got involved with tax investigations and learned bankruptcy, learned all aspects of probate court law, all aspects of doing municipal taxes. I've had to deal with appointed tax commissioners that didn't know what they were doing, that didn't go to the training, that didn't do the extra education. I've had to clean up messes they've made the last couple years. There's been significant errors in the tax office, significant. And I'm moving forward trying to clean that up, and it's not been easy back there. The changing in of appointed friends every couple years as to play tax commissioner, it was very difficult and very stressful for me. I think we're at a position now where it's doing really well. Jake is learning. It's going to take time. I think it's going to take him about 4 or 5 years to really have this under his belt. Taxes always change. The law always changes. I'm trying to streamline the processes, trying to make it more computer friendly, but at the same time, work within the city's budget. I need help. I can't do it all by myself. And I think Jake, I have taken on quite a bit by myself, but have streamlined those processes so I could do more work. But I do need that little extra help, and I think Jake, this is perfect. He can do the finance department stuff and help me where I'm, missing that extra help with the taxes. And, I think we'd make a good team. He's a smart kid. He knows what he's doing. He listens to me. He follows direction very well, and he's good with the public. And I think we have a good thing moving forward. I would like to see for the security and the progression of the city that we don't do any more appointments. I left my contract, trusting Jonathan that, we're going to fix this and stabilize it and move forward with it. I got 15 more years till retirement. I plan on giving the city everything I've got, leaving it the best I can, and training that next person to the best of my ability to keep it going strong and keep it going in the right direction. So I just, I don't usually speak up on these things. I just, want to support this, and hope you guys will help me out with it. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. DeBerto.
President. Jonathan, when we talked the other day about the mayor's secretary, you still planning on sending her back to the tax department? What's the matter, Peggy?
Mr. President.
Mr. Suchel.
So my intention is for a part-time clerk to fill some various roles. The exact job description for that individual, or I'm sorry, the mayor's secretary currently, is not been exactly defined as of yet. She's going to be playing a role in the building department, but to what capacity and how she could be actually utilized on a seasonal demand, there is a possibility. But the fact, if the individual is already in-house, and if it's a matter of assisting with things like mailings, yes, that's what she could do, or anyone in the building can do. So if the part-time clerk position does exist, there will be utilization on demand for those kind of things that would be better suited for someone like that than actually Jake or Leanne. So again, if indeed it's filling a matter of filling kind of like a floating type position when needed, but again, she's not going to have a permanent spot in that office.
Mr. Bob Colbert.
Real quick, Leanne, you were saying it takes, you think about 2 to 3 or longer for him to, for anybody, not, I don't know Jake, but for anybody to pick up what's going on back in the back?
Yes, I mean, you can have a finance background, but, like I said, in the 20 years I've been doing this, it's all about municipal law. Unless you understand municipal law, because that's mainly what the job's about. It's, anybody can add the numbers together, but it's knowing what the law is. That's the toughest part of it. And, he's in the beginning stages of this, but to feel fully secure, it's going to take me several years to get him, up to speed where, if I was gone, he could do this by himself. It's all about just doing the job, the experience. There is additional education that we do go to because the laws change. But again, it's just time and experience doing the job.
All right, just Mr. President,
Mr.
real quick. The one concern that I have, and that I would like to see in the ordinance is, right now it's starting off at 56. By year 3, he's capped at 58. My concern is by the time he gets up to speed, or I hate saying he, but whoever's in this position gets up to speed, will they be, since they're capped out, using this as a stepping stone to maybe potentially go to a larger city, a larger village, and it's going to be kind of that revolving door where every 3 to 4 years, if I'm in this position, you look at it and say, okay, I'm capped out. So are we better off saying, okay, instead of a 3-year step, maybe extend that step even further so we're not having to revisit this, every 3 years?
Mr. President, we discussed that 2 weeks ago also. The reason we did the 3 steps is because that is the end of Jonathan's term, and that we will be changing the charter by then, and everything can change. So that's why we only did 3. To go 4 doesn't make any sense until we get the charter changed, we get the contracts and everything like that. And that's why we decided that 3 steps was the best. we could add more, but they're not gonna make any sense with all those changes.
Mr. President.
Mr.
And
Stuchel.
again, by that point, the goal would be is that we actually have dipped into the charter. We've actually made the necessary changes to the structure of City Hall and the operation of the Finance Department and the true merger of that. So whether or not, again, you have, a department head that would be over, again, whether or not you truly have a CFO, whether or not we have, a village manager that has that kind of experience, dealing with HR, dealing with finance, dealing with development and whatnot. So again, trying to put together the wish list and how we'd want it structured, again, does make sense keeping it like this for right now. Again, because I see a total change in how we operate City Hall with the intent to maintain some sort of consistency at election time. So that way, again, there's anything jeopardized for the citizens and employees. That basically City Hall functions regardless of who's elected.
Mr. President,
Mr. DeBerke.
we don't have the contract yet, but since you're talking about these changes in 3 years possible, is this going to be a 3-year contract, or is it going to be a contract for 20 years, or what?
Mr. President,
Mr. Stuchel.
I guess the intent would be to have everything in order within the time frame in which my term is in place. But if for some reason it takes longer, I mean, I hate to restrict him to this, but if it would have to be, if it would have to be renewed. But again, I would hope that within a 3-year period, we could have this ironed out. So as far as for now, I guess if it could be renewed, the contract itself, or if you're saying just with respect to this ordinance, the contract, I guess whether or not we could have anything with a renewable term if necessary, but I certainly check with the law director on that. But I would like to think we could have this figured out within 3 years. If we can't, I think there's a real problem.
Mr. President,
Ms. Helms.
my contract was put in place in order to protect me to not be an appointee, not to be just because the next mayor, I don't like you, you're out of here. Because there's so much training involved and so much continuing education. And I've had long talks with Jake, and I don't think he wants to leave. He really wants to learn the job and move forward, because it does take a long time to train someone. I was very happy with my contract before. It pretty much made it so, I have to be fired for cause. And I think that's all we're looking for with this and with Jake. We're not looking for a specific contract with, after 3 years, do we renew our contract? I think we're just looking to secure the finance department so we don't have this in and out going on with the city and somebody new comes in and it all starts over again. The residents get very comfortable with someone they know and trust and have talked to before and knows their situation. And to learn the residents and the families, it takes a long time to learn that in this community. And that's that special piece that gives that certain service to the community. Hey, I'll call Leanne, let me talk to Leanne, she'll work with me on this. I do have to follow the law, don't get me wrong, but sometimes you have to work with the people, and that comes from experience and time in the city. And I'm going into my 11th year here, and I love it here. But I've worked really hard to get where I'm at, and I don't want to see that fall apart. So I think if we go back to the contract I had, I think that was a really good piece to work with. And again, my husband's a lawyer, and he thought it was a decent contract. He thought it was basically what other cities offer these type of positions, and I was really happy with it. That's all.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 21?
Mr. President, sorry. I
Sure.
hear you saying about the charter. So I know you mentioned that the law director gave her opinion that you can create this position, but can you eliminate the other 2 positions because of the charter? Or is that something that has to happen, with the vote?
They're not, I'm sorry, Mr. President, they're
Ms.
not
Brookwood.
listed in the charter.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Mr. Bob Culberson.
I think the law director was checking in, about the whole auditor position and eliminating the different positions and what positions you had to have. That's when we were talking about a charter, and then I think the mayor brought up forming maybe a charter committee because, we were talking about it early in this year.
All right. Clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer. Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Housefeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
I make a motion to adopt ordinance number 21, 2020.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Schultmeyer to adopt ordinance 21, 2020. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer. Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Housefeld.
Aye.
Mr. DeBerke, was that an aye or a no, or nay? Aye. 7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance 21, 2020 is adopted as read. Clerk, will you please give the first reading of ordinance 22, 2020?
Ordinance number 22, 2020, authorizing and directing the auditor to create a new line item and to decrease certain appropriations and provide additional appropriations and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 22, 2020. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
I make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 22, 2020.
I'll second that.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Ray Culberson to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 22, 2020. Are there any remarks?
Yes, Mr. President.
Mr. DeVerke.
Peggy, you said that the money for the police equipment was money we got in from what? Was it a gift or?
No, from the previous software company, when we had issues
Okay.
with it, they knew we'd have to get a new one, so they gave us basically a credit of $10,000 to put towards the new one.
Then the 20-01, the CRF Corona Care. That's money we already spent, correct?
Mr. President, no, it's
Ms.
not been
Crickland.
spent, it's money we've received. We can't spend it.
No,
till
but we spend it to be reimbursed.
No, this has not been spent yet. This is money that we just received and has to be encumbered to be spent. It's totally different.
Okay,
than-
what I'm saying, you had to give them a figure. We got the $201,000 because we spent that
No,
month past,
no, you're thinking.
reimbursed.
No, you're thinking probably the FEMA and other money. This is different money that came from the county. This, we have to appropriate now by November 20th and show them what we're gonna spend it on. This is money we just received and we have not spent yet.
But it has to be spent on Corona stuff, correct?
Yes,
And what happens if we don't spend the whole $201,000?
we have to give it back.
Mr. President,
Mr. Schulmeyer.
Peggy, is this like a forgivable loan, or is this a grant, or what is the form?
It's not even though some of the wording comes in grant, I was reading on it, it's not a grant, no, it's money they've given us. It's money that's come down from the federal to the state, and now they're giving it to the local governments to help us with our expenses with COVID. It does not need to be paid back.
Okay, and if we don't spend it, then
Then we have to give it back.
we have to give just what we don't spend?
Correct.
And then when you do that, you just do another ordinance and take it out, or how does that work?
I wouldn't even probably need another ordinance. I would have a line item. I would just write them a check back.
Okay.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
Peggy, is there a time frame
Yes, it has to be encumbered by November 20th.
but spent?
No,
So you have to
encumbered
have
means
ideas,
we
you
just have to have a PO.
For
and,
what
I
you've
mean,
encumbered?
Yes, because some
Okay.
communities are like ordering ambulances. That might not even be in, we're
Okay.
not, but, for a year or so, but no, it just needs to be
Just
encumbered.
need to be encumbered
Yes,
for what we're gonna spend, okay.
yes.
Anyone else? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 22, 2020? If not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer. Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Housefeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to adopt ordinance number 22, 2020.
Second it.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Ray Culberson to adopt ordinance number 22, 2020. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer. Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller. Ms. Housefeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 22, 2020 is adopted as read. Clerk, will you please give the first reading of ordinance 23, 2020?
Ordinance number 23, 2020, accepting and approving the terms of employment made by and between the Village of St. Bernard and St. Bernard Service Department Association and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 23, 2020. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 23, 2020.
Second it.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Ray Culberson to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance 23, 2020. Are there any remarks?
Mr. President,
Mr. Taberky?
just so everybody knows, it's a 3-year contract with 2% raises each year. And the longevity pay used to be a step pay between a higher date. That is being eliminated, so everybody will get the same longevity pay now.
Any other remarks? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 23? If not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson?
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer? Mr. Bob Culberson?
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse? Mrs. Miller? Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
I make a motion to adopt ordinance number 23, 2020.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Schultmeyer to adopt ordinance 23, 2020. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson?
Aye.
Mr. Schuldmeyer? Mr. Bob Culberson?
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse?
Aye.
Mrs. Miller? Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance 23, 2020 is adopted as read. This time, does anyone on council have anything under old business? Does anyone on council have anything under new business?
Mr. President,
Mr. Bob Culberson?
I know Paul's not here, but I did get a question. I guess the dance program was canceled for the remainder of this year. And there were questions about, refunds, because I guess when coronavirus hit back in the springtime, it was told that it would be applied to the following dance program. And now they're wondering if they will be getting refunds for their uniforms or their dance fees.
Mr. President,
Mr. Stuchel?
the Recreation Department will be making an announcement about that, whether or not there'll be anything carried over or whether or not we'll be issuing refunds. But the Recreation Director will be making an announcement, and you can expect that to be announced by call command, be in the newsletter, and he will report at the next Committee of the Whole as to the process, as to how that'll work.
Anyone else under new business?
Yes, Mr. President.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Not only because I live up on Tower Avenue by the schools, but I'm getting residents complaining about speeding really bad through the school zone up there and from Franklin Avenue to Church Street. And I know I'm gonna get myself shot one of these days because I yell at them to slow down all the time. Residents up there, I'm not sure how all the residents feel, but I know I've talked to quite a few of them, and they're wanting something done as far as speed bumps, as far as more police presence, whatever it takes to speed these people down, because they're going extremely fast. And it's very dangerous, not only with having school there, but also having the park right there. And it's out of control, especially over the last 3 weeks. So just wanted to let you guys know.
Anyone else under new business? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council this evening? If not, the next Committee of the Whole will be Thursday, October 8th at 7 p.m. This time I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President,
Mr. Ray Culberson.
make a motion, we adjourn.
A motion by Mr. Ray Culberson, second by Ms. Hausfeld to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? So ordered. We are adjourned.